One afternoon, a well-dressed man walked into the courtroom with the kind of calm confidence that comes from never really being challenged. His name was Richard Halverson, a real estate investor with multiple properties across the state, known for negotiating hard and rarely losing. Across from him stood Angela Ruiz, a contractor in her late 30s, holding a folder filled with documents, invoices, and photos. Her posture was steady, but her eyes carried something sharper, frustration that had been building for months. At the bench sat Judge Judy Scheindlin, already reviewing the file, flipping through the pages with quiet focus. The clerk announced the case. $25,000, contract dispute. Judge Judy looked up. "All right," she said calmly. "Plaintiff, tell me what happened." Angela stepped forward. "Your Honor, I was hired by Mr. Halverson to renovate one of his rental properties. Full kitchen remodel, flooring, electrical updates. We agreed on $25,000. Richard shifted slightly, adjusting his cuff, his expression neutral. Angela continued. "I completed the work, passed inspection, tenants moved in, and then he refused to pay the remaining balance." A faint smile appeared on Richard's face. Not obvious, but there. Judge Judy noticed. "Is there something amusing?" she asked without raising her voice. Richard shook his head lightly. "No, Your Honor." Judge Judy turned back to Angela. "You have a contract?" "Yes." She handed it over. Judge Judy reviewed it quickly. Signed by both parties, payment schedule outlined. She glanced up at Richard. "Is that your signature?" "Yes." "And how much have you paid so far?" $10,000. "So you owe 15. Richard shook his head slightly. "No, I don't." Judge Judy paused. "Explain." Richard leaned forward slightly, his tone controlled. "The work wasn't completed to standard." Angela's expression tightened immediately. "That's not true." Judge Judy raised her hand. Silence. She looked back at Richard. "What wasn't up to standard?" Richard exhaled lightly. "Finishing details, cabinet alignment, some electrical concerns." Angela shook her head. "Everything passed inspection." Judge Judy turned to her. "You have proof of that?" "Yes." She handed over inspection reports. Judge Judy scanned them. City approval, electrical cleared, structural cleared. She placed the papers down. Richard remained composed. "Inspection doesn't mean quality," he said. Judge Judy looked at him. "It means compliance," she replied, "which is what the contract requires unless stated otherwise." Richard didn't respond. Judge Judy leaned back slightly. "Did you notify her of these issues before refusing payment?" Richard hesitated briefly. "We discussed concerns verbally." Angela shook her head again. "No, we didn't." Judge Judy looked between them. "Do you have any written communication?" Richard didn't answer immediately. "No." Judge Judy nodded slowly. "So no written complaint, no formal rejection, no request for corrections." Richard shifted slightly. "We were evaluating." Angela let out a small breath, almost under her voice. Judge Judy turned back to her. "When did you finish the work?" "About 3 months ago." "And when was the final invoice sent?" "The same week." Judge Judy nodded. She turned to Richard again. "You've had 3 months to evaluate." "Yes." "And in those 3 months, did you hire someone else to fix these alleged issues?" Richard hesitated. "No." "Did you prevent tenants from moving in?" "No." "Did you reduce rent due to these problems?" "No." Each answer came out shorter than the last. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "So you're collecting full rent on a property you claim isn't up to standard." Richard didn't respond. The silence stretched just long enough to be noticed. Angela stood still, but her grip on the folder relaxed just a little. Judge Judy picked up one of the photos Angela had submitted. Renovated kitchen, clean lines, modern finish. She placed it back down. "This doesn't look incomplete," she said. Richard leaned forward again. "Looks can be deceiving." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow slightly. Then show me what's wrong. Richard paused. It's difficult to explain without a full walkthrough. Judge Judy didn't move. You've had 3 months to document it. No answer. She tapped the contract lightly. You agreed to pay $25,000 upon completion. She tapped the inspection report. The work passed. She looked at him directly. You're living with the benefits. Richard shifted again. But that doesn't mean I should pay for substandard work. Judge Judy didn't respond immediately. She just watched him, carefully. Then she asked, calmly, "What exactly are you trying not to pay for?" Richard opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out right away. Richard adjusted his sleeve slowly, buying himself a second. "For the quality," he said finally. Judge Judy didn't react. "You've said that already," she replied. "Now define it." Richard exhaled lightly. "It didn't meet the level I expect for my properties." Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "Your expectations are not in this contract." Silence. Angela didn't move, but her eyes stayed fixed on him now. Judge Judy continued. "This agreement doesn't say pay if Richard is impressed. It says payment upon completion." Richard shifted again. "And the work is completed," she added. He shook his head slightly. "I disagree." Judge Judy nodded once. "On what basis?" Richard hesitated. "The finishing wasn't premium." "Premium wasn't in the contract either." Another pause. Richard's answers were getting thinner. Judge Judy tapped the desk lightly with her pen. "Let's go through this step by step," she said. "You hired her." "Yes." "You agreed on $25,000." "Yes." "You paid $10,000 up front." "Yes." "She completed the work." "I don't agree." Judge Judy didn't look at him for a second. She looked at the inspection report instead, then back at him. "The city agrees." Silence. Angela exhaled slowly. Judge Judy leaned back slightly. "You've had tenants in the property for how long?" "About 2 months." "And they've complained?" "No." "You've had to fix anything?" "No." "You've lost any income?" "No." Each answer came out quieter. Judge Judy nodded slowly. "So everything functions." Richard didn't respond. "That's not a trick question," she said. "Everything functions?" "Yes." The word landed reluctantly. Judge Judy let that sit. Then she reached for another document in the file. "This is your listing," she said. Richard looked up slightly. "What?" Judge Judy held up a printed page. "You advertised this property for rent after renovation." Angela's head turned slightly toward the paper. Judge Judy read from it. "Fully upgraded luxury unit, brand new modern kitchen, high-end finishes throughout." The words hung in the room. Richard's expression didn't collapse, but it tightened. Judge Judy lowered the page slowly. "You wrote that?" Richard hesitated. "My marketing team." "Under your company name," she said. Silence. Angela stared at him now. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "So let me understand this clearly." Her tone stayed calm. "In public, you advertise luxury and high-end." She tapped the listing. "But in court, you claim it's not worth paying for." Richard didn't answer. The room stayed still. Judge Judy didn't move her eyes from him. "That's not a quality issue," she said. "That's a consistency issue." Richard shifted in his seat. "We use standard language for listings." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. "Standard exaggeration?" No response. Angela's expression changed slightly. Not surprise, recognition. Judge Judy placed the listing down. "You told the public one thing." She tapped the contract. "You agreed to another." She paused. "And now you're telling this court something completely different." Richard leaned forward again, but slower this time. "We're just trying to ensure we're paying for what we received." Judge Judy nodded once. "And what you received is something you're proudly renting as high-end." Silence. She let it sit. Then she asked, very calmly, "If the work was truly substandard, why didn't you lower the rent?" Richard didn't answer. His eyes shifted slightly. Judge Judy didn't wait long. "Because you know it isn't substandard." The sentence landed clean. Angela's shoulders dropped slightly. Judge Judy leaned back again. "You're collecting premium rent." She tapped the listing again. "On work you claim isn't worth paying for." Richard's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Judge Judy watched him for a moment longer. Then she asked the question that shifted everything. "When you listed this property as luxury, were you already planning not to pay her?" Richard didn't answer right away. The question didn't leave him much room to move. He looked at the listing on the desk, then at the contract, then briefly toward Angela, just a quick glance, before returning his eyes to the judge. "No," he said, but this time it didn't sound firm. Judge Judy didn't react. She simply held his gaze. "Then explain the timeline," she said. Richard exhaled slowly. "We listed the property after the work was done." "And before you paid her," Judge Judy added. A pause. "Yes." "And you described it as luxury and high-end." "Yes." "And tenants moved in." "Yes." "And you collected rent." "Yes." She nodded once. "And then you decided not to pay." Richard shifted slightly. "We had concerns." Judge Judy didn't respond to that word this time. Instead, she leaned forward just a little. "When did those concerns begin?" Richard hesitated. "After we reviewed everything." "How long after?" "A few days." Judge Judy picked up another paper from the file. "This email is from your office," she said. Richard's eyes moved toward it again. She read from it, calm and precise. "Hold final payment. Reviewing cost exposure and contractor leverage." The words landed heavier than anything else so far. Angela's head turned sharply toward Richard. Richard didn't look at her. Judge Judy lowered the paper slowly. "That's not about quality," she said. "That's about strategy." Richard spoke, but his voice had lost its earlier control. "We were just being careful." "Careful about what?" Silence. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. "Exposure to what?" Richard's fingers pressed lightly against the table. No answer. Judge Judy leaned back, studying him. "You accepted the work," she said. She tapped the inspection report. It passed. She tapped the listing. "You advertised it as high-end." She tapped the email. "And then you looked for a way not to pay." Richard shook his head, but slower now. "That's not accurate." Judge Judy didn't move. "Then correct it." He opened his mouth, stopped, closed it again. The silence did the rest. Angela stood still, but the tension in her shoulders had eased, not because it was over, but because it was finally clear. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "You didn't refuse to pay because the work was bad." Her voice stayed calm. "You refused to pay because you thought you could keep the benefit and avoid the cost." Richard didn't respond. Judge Judy let that sit for a moment. Then she asked one final time, "When you sent that email about contractor leverage, had you already decided she wasn't getting paid?" Richard stared at the desk, the same place he'd been looking at every time the answers got harder. The room stayed quiet, no movement, no interruption. Then quietly, "Yes." The word settled everything. Judge Judy nodded once. That was enough. She closed the file with a calm, deliberate motion and looked back up at him. "You don't get to rewrite an agreement after you've benefited from it," she said. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You hired her. She did the work. It passed inspection. You used it to generate income. And then you made a calculated decision not to pay." Richard said nothing. Angela didn't move. Judge Judy continued. "That's not a dispute. That's bad faith." A brief pause, then she delivered it cleanly. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $25,000. Angela closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. The tension she'd been holding for months finally released, not dramatically, just enough to breathe normally again. Richard leaned back slowly. No argument, no smile, just quiet acceptance of something he could no longer avoid. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "And let me be very clear," she added. Richard looked up again. When you put something in writing, contracts, listings, emails, you create a record of your intent. She tapped the email lightly. And sometimes one line is all it takes to expose everything. Silence, then a small nod. We're done here. The gavel came down softly. Angela gathered her papers, but her hands were steady now. Richard remained seated for a moment longer, staring at the same documents that had undone his argument. Because in the end, it wasn't the amount that decided the case. It was the one question that forced the truth he had already written down himself. Richard didn't stand up immediately after the gavel. Most people move the second a decision is announced. He didn't. He stayed seated, looking at the papers in front of him, the contract, the listing, the email. The same documents that just minutes ago felt like routine business. Now they looked different. Final. Across the room, Angela gathered her folder slowly. Not rushed, not emotional, just finished. She turned slightly, about to leave, when Richard finally stood up. "Ms. Ruiz," he said. His voice was lower now, controlled but without the earlier edge. Angela paused, turned back. "Yes?" There was a short silence, not awkward, just honest. "I'll arrange the payment," he said. Angela held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. "I expect you will." No anger, no satisfaction, just closure. Richard nodded once. For the first time since walking into the courtroom, he didn't have anything else to add. Angela turned and walked out. Outside in the hallway, the air felt lighter, not because something had been won, but because something had finally been resolved. She leaned briefly against the wall, exhaling slowly, like she'd been holding that breath for months. Inside, Richard adjusted his jacket, but the movement felt different now. Less about appearance, more about regaining composure. His attorney leaned in slightly. "We'll handle the transfer," he said quietly. Richard nodded, but his attention wasn't fully there. It stayed on that one line. Reviewing contractor leverage. A sentence he probably wrote in seconds. A decision he thought was just strategy. But in the end, it said everything. Back outside, Angela stepped into the sunlight, pulling her phone out. She scrolled briefly, then stopped on a message thread. Unread messages from suppliers, workers asking about payments. She typed a short reply. "It's done. I'll clear everything this week." She hit send. Simple, but it carried weight. Back inside, Richard finally walked toward the exit, slower than when he came in. Not defeated, but quieter. Because for someone used to controlling outcomes, this one didn't turn on negotiation. It turned on something smaller, something he didn't think mattered. A single question, and the answer he had already written long before he ever stepped into that courtroom.